Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack a truly fascinating piece of modern history. Today, we're looking at the incredible historical trajectory of Professor Is-haq Olayede, whose monumental tenure as the Registrar of Nigeria's Joint Admissions and Matriculation Board, or JAMB, officially wraps up in July 2026. Now, this isn't just a basic story about an administrator, it's a profound look at leadership, foresight, and what actually happens when deep local institutional knowledge clashes with sweeping bureaucratic mandates. All of this ultimately comes down to a battle to protect the very soul of Nigerian higher education. If you want to understand the intricate dynamics of Nigerian education over the last decade or so, this is exactly where you need to look.
Here's our agenda for today. First, we'll look at a quintessential academic leader. Second, the IPPIS payroll system. Third, the academic union's pushback. Fourth, Oloyede's prophetic warning. And finally, his vindication and ultimate legacy. Starting off with Section 1, a quintessential academic leader, building a legacy of integrity. You know, Professor Oloyede's credibility didn't just appear out of thin air. He served as the vice-chancellor of the University of Ilorin, starting back in 2007. And by 2009, he was the president of the Association of African Universities. This gave him unparalleled, boots-on-the-ground insight into how global universities actually function, and more importantly, how they thrive. So when he was appointed JAMB Registrar in 2016 and then reappointed in 2021 for outstanding performance, he brought all of this deep institutional knowledge with him. He wasn't some outsider looking in, he was a fierce champion of the academic system from the inside. The source material makes a really interesting point here, drawing a parallel to Michelle Obama's famous observation. The idea is that elevation to high office didn't change Oloyede, it simply revealed his unalterable integrity. Throughout his various roles, he remained remarkably consistent. He always supported his colleagues and maintained a steadfast commitment to the public good, which, honestly, has been widely recognized by civil society and government leaders alike. Moving on to Section 2, the IPPIS payroll system, the bureaucratic intervention. So let's define exactly what we're talking about here. IPPIS stands for the Integrated Payroll Personnel Information System. Objectively speaking, it was part of the federal government's transformation agenda. And the stated goal for this system was actually quite logical on paper. The idea was to create a single, centralized database for the Nigerian public service to prevent wastage and leakages by ensuring correct remuneration and prompt, direct payments. Basically, the government wanted to use technology to monitor staff payments against the budget and clean up the payroll. Sounds reasonable enough, right? Well, that brings us to Section 3, the academic union's pushback. Specifically, the resistance from ASUU and Kanyua. The contrast here is just night and day. The government was pursuing centralized efficiency, but the Academic Staff Union of Universities, ASUU, saw a World Bank and IMF-imposed burden that entirely undermined Nigeria's sovereignty. And more specifically to their daily reality on campus, they argued it completely destroyed university autonomy. Think about it, universities require a lot of flexibility to hire visiting academics or temporary staff for intellectual enrichment. ASU argued that a rigid, centralized system operating all the way in Abuja would utterly restrict their ability to attract quality academic talent. And get this, it wasn't just ASU. Even Kanyua, a union which initially tried to cooperate, hit a massive wall of very specific operational grievances during a November 2019 meeting with the finance minister. They were struggling to pay sabbatical staff, facing massive delays in promotion arrears, and dealing with a total failure of the system to remit third-party deductions to staff cooperatives. Perhaps most frustratingly, and you really have to picture this, they highlighted the absurd reality that a university lecturer might have to travel literally all the way to the IPPIS office in Abuja just to resolve a basic salary shortchange. Now, at that 2019 meeting, the government's team, which, interestingly enough, included the former accountant general, promised to set up local desk officers in university bursary departments to solve these exact issues on the ground. Kanyua even advised its members to enroll based on these promises. But, spoiler alert, those assurances were simply ignored. The institutional mechanisms to resolve payroll issues locally were never established. Naturally, this failure heavily aggravated the controversy and completely validated the union's worst fears. All right, Section 4, Oloyede's prophetic warning, the Cassandra of Nigerian education. Back in December 2019, Professor Oloyede gave an interview where he issued a stark, almost chilling warning. He said, "We are swinging from one extreme to the other. IPPIS might do more damage to the university system than good." The absolute crucial takeaway for Nigerian education here is that he wasn't speaking merely as a government appointee at JAMB. He was speaking as a seasoned professor and a former university vice-chancellor, fiercely trying to protect the university ecosystem. He really hit the nail on the head here. He pointed out a fundamental truth. Previously, universities maintained sane local regulatory safeguards via the National Universities Commission. Forcing them onto IPPIS meant dismantling that entire structure and mixing them with a federal civil service that he bluntly described as stinking with corruption. He warned that forcing vice-chancellors to lobby in Abuja for their funds would cause an unregulated intermingling, effectively transferring a poisonous dose of corruption directly into the academic system. He even quipped that VCs traveling to Abuja would just be learning new tricks about corruption. So his ultimate thesis was essentially the exact opposite of the government's pitch. While the government presented IPPIS as this great corruption prevention tool, Oloyede prognosticated that by removing local institutional safeguards, IPPIS would actually become an instrument of massive centralized corruption. And finally, Section 5, Vindication and Ultimate Legacy. History proves him right. Fast forward to May 30, 2026, and we see total legal vindication. The president of the National Industrial Court of Nigeria, Justice Benedict Kanyep, delivered a landmark judgment. The court legally validated the academic union's resistance, ruling that rejecting the university's own systems in favor of imposing IPPIS was fundamentally wrong and it violated the autonomy granted to them by the Universities Act of 2003. So, the imposition was officially ruled illegal. But then, the vindication gets much, much darker. Just look at this staggering number. 109.5 billion naira. That is the almost unbelievable estimated amount that the former Accountant General of the Federation, literally the very same official who sat in meetings in 2019 defending the integrity of IPPIS to the academic unions, is alleged to have misappropriated through IPPIS and related platforms. And honestly, the hits just kept coming. In July 2026, a federal high court directed the final forfeiture of nearly another billion naira linked to IPPIS fraud, this time recovered by the ICPC. Oloyede's 2019 warning that IPPIS would breed mega-corruption rather than prevent it had become a devastating historical reality. The system didn't plug the leaks, it created a massive centralized dam that allegedly allowed officials to siphon off funds on a completely unprecedented scale. When you actually put his 2019 warnings side by side with the historical reality of 2026, the clarity of his vision is undeniable. He warned about autonomy. The courts eventually agreed. He warned about centralized corruption. The mega-fraud allegations against the very architects of the system proved him spectacularly correct. It was unparalleled foresight, born of a deep, genuine understanding of how institutions actually work. As Professor Oloyede prepares to transition to post-JAMB life in July 2026, the source material notes that as a globally recognized Islamic scholar, he's likely very familiar with this verse from the Quran, and grant me an honorable mention in later generations. At a time when public despondency in Nigeria was growing and hope for truly dedicated public servants was fading, his tenure provided a visionary template for national rebirth. He stood his ground on principle, armed with facts and experience, and history has indeed granted him that honorable mention. Which leaves us with a really big question to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. We've seen what one individual's integrity and deep institutional knowledge can do to identify and warn against systemic flaws. But individuals eventually retire. So how can public service at large institutionalize the kind of foresight, courage, and integrity modeled by Professor Oloyede so it becomes the ultimate safeguard for the Nigerian education system rather than the exception? It's a complex challenge for sure, but one that is absolutely vital for the future. Thank you for joining me to unpack this fascinating source material. Keep learning and keep asking the big questions.